the BYU Cougars. And man, it felt like a quiet offseason, honestly, until about mid-spring. And that's when all the Jake Retzlaff information started coming out. We don't have to rehash all the legal mumbo jumbo here or point fingers or try to figure out, get to the bottom of what actually happened there. That can be done on a number of other podcasts. But the bottom line as it pertains to BYU this year is Jake Retzlaff will not be suiting up for them. He's down at Tulane, and they will now have to find a new quarterback. Now, Retzlaff, in my mind, I kind of went back and forth on what I thought this meant for BYU this year, because to me, he's kind of that prototypical just kind of gamer quarterback. Mm-hmm. He's going to put up good numbers. He's going to sling it around the yard. He put up some nice numbers with his legs as well last year. But at the same time, he threw 12 interceptions, wasn't as consistent as you'd want him to be. Would have gotten another year in the offseason, but call me crazy, I don't know that this is going to be just a season killer for BYU. I think they've got enough coming back on offense. They've got their leading rusher, their leading receiver, got a lot of talent on offensive line, and they're bringing back a defense that, despite those 12 interceptions from Jake Retzlaff, took away 22 balls through the air of their own last year, had 22 interceptions of their own, and did enough big plays on their side of the ball to still help BYU end up with a +8 turnover margin. So there's still a lot of players on this team, and I think they can easily match this ranking or exceed it this year.
Yeah, I think, last year was such an interesting season because there were a lot of questions about Kalani Sitake's job status coming in, right? Would the favored son actually be kicked out of the nest? There were some folks that said, well, you know what, like BYU wants to win in the Big 12 and they might have to remove Sitake after a disaster of a 2023 season to get there. And there were others that said, no, give it time. And that latter camp ended up being proven right. We were there, as we've talked about many times, against SMU when they just flat out bullied the Ponies offense. They would not allow SMU to consistently move the ball. And sure, SMU shot themselves in the foot time and time again trying to get a ball into the end zone. But the defense was extremely physical. The offense was good enough, especially on the ground game, and they were able to reel off 9 wins in a row to start the season. Now, to your point about Jake Retzlaff, gamer, I think, is the perfect way to describe him because you look at the numbers and he's not an efficiency merchant. Just a little bit over 50% completion, 20 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He had a flair for the dramatic, to be sure, but he was not a guy that you looked at on paper if you did a blind resume and said, that's who I want quarterbacking my team if we're going to go win a conference championship. So as the line plummeted for BYU as that news came out and it became very clear that Retzlaff was no longer going to be with the program, BYU was listed as one of the top contenders, and that's why they're here at 5 in our Jimmy's and Joe's ranking, right? Now the over-under, I believe, is all the way down to 6.5, and the money seems to be coming in even on the underside of that. But here's why I think that might be the casual reactionary football take. And I had help here from a BYU beat writer and Terrell Williams, who put together an excellent thread of the quarterback options that BYU has still on the roster. I would highly encourage folks to go over to our Substack when this episode comes out. Obviously, the written preview comes out with it, and I've linked to that in that article. I would go read that. You'll see the deep dive in much greater detail than what we'll break down here tonight. But essentially, 30,000-foot view. They have freshman Bear Bachmeier, who's a physical specimen, transferred from Stanford, I believe, and is now...
Bear and his brother, he has an animal brother.
Tiger.
Tiger, yeah.
Yeah. So the brothers Bachmeier, not including Hank, who I believe has exhausted eligibility, are at BYU. You have Utah State transfer McKay Hillstad, and then pocket passer Trayson Bourget, and I believe I'm saying that right. Again, BYU fans, if I got any of those names wrong, please let us know in the comments. But essentially, Williams goes down to break down not just who they are, but also kind of their tendencies and what they bring to the table. And while I think that early on, BYU could probably have some interesting games or quarters or halves, what have you, as they try and figure out who is going to be QB1. I think over the course of the regular season, the Cougars are actually going to be just fine. You mentioned they bring back LJ Martin running the ball. The offensive line brings back 3 of 5 starters. They're going to have new tackles, but the interior is intact. So from that standpoint, I think that BYU is still going to be able to be physical in the trenches. I still think LJ Martin is going to be able to run the football. And they've got 3 somewhat talented passers, even though these guys may be relatively unproven. They're guys that at one point or another had some acumen, joining whether it was BYU or in Hillstead's case, Utah State. So the sky is not falling. I don't believe in Provo. There is more unknown and more to prove from the quarterback spot. But what team around the SEC or the Big Ten isn't kind of in same waters, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I don't think this is going to sink them. And then you add all that to the fact that they're bringing back a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball as too. I think Isaiah Glasker and Jack Kelly have the potential to be a top 5 linebacker duo, not just in the Big 12, but maybe even in the country. When you look at the production that they put on the field last year, they've got a lot of turnover on the defensive line, but they bring in starters from other programs there too. They had a top 20 pass defense last year. Like I mentioned, they picked off 22 passes. Don't think they're going to necessarily replicate that and have the turnover luck that they did last year, but there's a lot of talent on that defense. And when you look at some of the game by game stats, that was the defense that was keeping them in some of those games. That game against Utah, where the offense kind of sputtered a little bit. Several others down the stretch last year where the defense is leading the way, right? The SMU game, like you mentioned at the very beginning, that kind of sparked the run. So this is a team, yeah, I think that you can buy low on and maybe find some value, especially in that 6.5 over under. You look at the schedule and they don't have as tough of a non-conference slate as they did last year, but it is a little tricky. They host Stanford.
Yeah.
I don't know what Stanford's going to be this year.
Does
I don't
anybody?
think Stanford knows what they're going to be this year with an interim head coach. They go to ECU, which I commented on an earlier episode this summer was a weird game, and I was corrected multiple times in the YouTube comments and on Twitter that this has actually been a fairly frequent series that BYU and ECU have played. So my apologies for missing that in the past decade or so, but they have played relatively often, and that surprised me when people told me that. But they go to East Carolina, very tricky game there, and they follow that up the next week playing at Colorado, another team that just could be really good or could be struggling to make a bowl. So it's a tricky start. I think there's a strong possibility that they're at least 3-1, maybe even 4-0 there. And then they host West Virginia for an opportunity to get a 5th win and maybe even be bowl eligible by October 11th when they go to Arizona. Another team that you and I have kind of low in the Big 12, but Jimmy's and Joe's have a little bit higher.
Yeah, it's an interesting start. You could certainly make the case that they would run the table and go 6-0. And I think if Retzlaff was still on the roster, I think the vacuum would say, yeah, BYU starts this season undefeated, at least through the first half. The only thing that concerns me about those first 6 games is that the 3 road trips are kind of weird places to play. Greenville is going to be interesting. Now, East Carolina had a couple of players like JD Lampley get in some legal trouble. Lampley's going to be a big part of what that pass rush needs to do. We just don't know what their status is going to be for the season. Suspended indefinitely is all we know at the moment, which is a tough look for the Pirates. Colorado, we talked about in the last episode, could be some good, could be some bad, probably somewhere in between. We expect them to make a bowl game, and getting that game at home certainly helps the Buffs. And then going to Arizona, the one area that I do think BYU could be in trouble is if any of these contests turn into shootouts, right? Because even at their best last year, we didn't really necessarily see that offense just start scoring a bunch of points. 31 points a game was what their average was. They were a top 40 offense, but a lot of those drives were defense aided. They had a lot of drives that started in plus field position because of those interceptions, because of those turnovers fixed. They had special team scores. Like the Kansas State game got out of hand in a hurry, and that was just a cavalcade of errors for the Wildcats. So all of that to say, long-winded way to say the ball definitely bounced the Cougars' way multiple times last year, and it papered over, I think, some inefficiencies that the offense had. Could they take the step forward this year with a new quarterback? Absolutely they could, and I've given you the case for that. I do worry about the defense and the fact that it's experienced players in the back end, guys that have taken snaps for BYU, but none of their primary starters return in the secondary. The other thing that I'm concerned about is the pass rush. They were 98th in sack production last year. I don't really know if that's going to improve all that much this year. Logan Latui, again, apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly. He comes back at edge. I think he missed most of last season, I want to say, due to an injury. But regardless, a better pass rush in year 3 of Jay Hill is going to go a long way in helping the Cougars replicate a top 15 total defense. When you look at this over-under, I think it feels artificially low. I look at this schedule and go, even if things go awry, even if they don't necessarily run the gauntlet in that opening part of the season, I still feel like 7-5 is the floor here for BYU. So I'm comfortably on the over here.
I wrote down 6-6 was the floor, and that's if everything goes wrong, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think they have a good enough run game and defense to rely on to win at least 7 games this year. And I think on the ceiling side, they're probably about a 9-3 ceiling. I
Yeah.
wouldn't be shocked at all if they found a way to win 9 games and get to 10 with a bowl game. I want to highlight the back half of that schedule really quickly because it does get tricky around late October, early November. It's Utah at home in the Holy War, at Iowa State, a bye week, at Texas Tech, and then TCU back at home. That's by far the toughest 4-game stretch on the schedule. You're hoping to find a way to split those, I think, if you're BYU and you're just looking at that right now. Maybe win the home games, win the rivalry game. But those back-to-back road games at Iowa State and at Texas Tech, even with a bye in the middle, it's going to be really tough.
Yeah, it feels like they're road games, much like Texas Tech. We'll get to the Red Raiders at the end of this episode, but much like the Red Raiders, the hardest games for BYU are on the road. And there's not really one other than Utah that I look at and go, man, that would be nice to, like you could flip the Utah game. You could go on the road. They won that game last year in a classic in Salt Lake City. Utah is, a little bit of a toss-up this year. We like some of the pieces going on for the Utes, but when it comes to the real contenders, Iowa State, Texas Tech, even Cincinnati on the road at the end of the year, like with the offense that the Bearcats hopefully will put together, it's a tricky stretch run. But I believe in Sataki. I think he did a huge job to win over the locker room and kind of reaffirm his culture there. And if they can get the defense back up and running and playing to their standards, just like they did last year, and as long as the offense doesn't have the wheels fall off, I think the Cougars are going to be a dangerous out this year.
I'm right there with you. I'm taking the over on BYU. I'm going to buy low and get some value there.